You can read more about them on page 6 to introduce themselves, and then you will be, I don't like the word flies on the wall, but it will be like some sort of reality TV. You can sit and witness the conversation. So first of all, Sue.
I'm Sue McDermott from Torbay.
I'm Michelle, I manage Ageing Better Middlesbrough.
I'm Javairia, I'm part of Ageing Better Middlesbrough.
And you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out that I'm Mark from Middlesbrough Environment City.
Right. So I think what we've been looking at with the sort of feedback of today, we've been really looking at some phrases have come up for me, and I know we were thinking about, for some of the things, this is the tip of the iceberg of what we're looking at. And I wondered whether any of you have any thoughts and reflections about actually what is underneath the murky waters of the iceberg that we rarely talk about or rarely admitted. Stunned silence.
So I think I was talking about my experience recently of sitting with commissioners, health and social care commissioners, talking about mental health, and that there is a real focus on that kind of high-end level of need, the sort of crisis end, and that the focus when we talk about prevention or what's existing at the moment are assets in our community, that the focus isn't there, that the knowledge among my fellow commissioners isn't there, that the appreciation of the work going on, and I'm speaking only for sort of Torbay and sort of Cornwall and Devon, that hasn't really been there. And what we know is that that's often what helps build people's personal resiliences, what helps them sort of maintain their well-being. It's that kind of invisible connectedness that supports people, and yet if it's not being provided by a health professional, its value isn't recognised, and it's often not being funded as a priority. Mm-hmm. So those were my thoughts.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that what Sophie talked around, life support services that are incredibly hard to sometimes describe and measure, they're the things that often are missed or not useful. So we know locally that commissioning and nationally commissioning happens on an issue-by-issue basis, but yet the people that we're working with are the same people. So, Ageing Better is working with people within secondary care services. We're working with people who have long-term conditions and who are working with primary care and secondary care, dementia services, yet they're the same people. We're working with people who have substance misuse issues and issues around domestic violence and housing, yet all of those services and support and all of the partnerships that support those services sit separately, mm-hmm. And are commissioned separately and funded separately, which creates barriers around the way that we work together. And I think we were just talking about that kind of divide between us that doesn't help some of the people that sit just underneath the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm. They've got a mic.
Right, okay. I'm very interested in what was already said about commissioning and how services are commissioned. And I feel very much it's time for us to be taking a new view of how we commission services. So if we send out tenders to buy widgets and we want 50 widgets, we will get 50 widgets. And there'll be no joined upness, because one organisation's put in for that tender, they've got that work, they do that. They do what they have to do. My feeling is we need to move away from that approach and start to look at how we work together. We've got well-established partnerships in many places. Mm. And how, as partners, we work with commissioners to come up with models, ways of working, which actually bring us all in with our own specialisms together to address. I know we don't like the phrase complex problems because it hides from dealing with them, but they are complex problems and they need complex solutions of people working together, not individually identified pieces of work.
Yeah, no, I agree that there are complex problems. What I said is that using that term gives people a let-off, that it's too hard to address. I wonder, so we heard the phrase, we treasure what we can measure, earlier, which made me a little bit sad, I'm sorry to say. So I think sometimes we set off to do what we can evidence or what we can measure. We don't set off to do what needs doing, which can sometimes be a very different thing. So I wonder whether you have any thoughts on this.
Well, my role within Asian Better Middlesbrough is that we don't use measure tools. We use it as an aid, but it's not fixed. And we're able to address those complex issues within our little service. But that service is going to come to an end soon, in 2 years' time, and we'll continue to provide that support. But it is possible. And providing long-term support is also possible, and we've done it. We've shown it, and we've had significant impact by providing that support without using measuring tools, without being fixated on one particular issue. We're able to address those complexities, and it works. So why can't other services do that? Why can't we support other services in understanding that it can be done?
Are you looking at me?
I am.
I have a particular soapbox around measurement which goes entirely against we treasure what we measure. And that's mainly because when you look at the research around what works to improve well-being, mental health, or connect people to each other, the evidence base is already there. It's massive and significant. And we are generally always constantly remeasuring the same things that we do and reboxing them and renaming them, but ultimately what we're doing is the same thing that we've always done. I worked in drug and alcohol services for 9 years. The work that Ageing Better is doing now is not dissimilar to working with people with drug and alcohol issues. The measurement tools are not dissimilar. The approaches are exactly the same. The things that work are the same: time, relationships, support, trust, human connection, and a myriad of different tools and partnership working. They're still the same things, yet we're still forced to measure them. I want to move past measuring the impact of interventions, and I'd quite like to see commissioners measuring the quality of interventions, because we know if A plus B equals C, if we get A and B right, the evidence already suggests that C will happen. I think if I see one more statistic that says we helped 70 to 80% of the people improve their well-being, I would guarantee anyone working in a social care type service, your impact will be 70 to 80% of the people you work with will improve their well-being on the SWEM webs or whatever the recovery star. If you drop below 70%, probably a bit rubbish. If you get above 80, probably doing amazing. But roughly and it's been that way for 20 years. So we know if we do A and we do B, 70 or 80% of people will feel better in their lives. So why aren't we measuring how we're doing A and B, and why are commissioners obsessed with C? That's what I don't understand. So yes, we treasure what we measure, but I don't want that to be the reality actually in the world, and we can't continue to support that weird machine of measurement tools because it's a nonsense.
Yep. It's like Gogglebox. We've got a round of applause.
So I'm going to agree with that, but I'm also going to say when we measure quality, and what we don't often hear is that survivor voice, that expert by experience, to actually say what quality looks like. What does it mean, and what would it mean for me to have the kind of service that would make a difference to me? Where is my place at the table? Where is my voice? And not just one voice, because if we're talking about service user involvement, one voice is not enough. We know that the agendas are often set elsewhere. The decisions are usually made not in that room. So if we're going to talk about changing services to actually improve in terms of quality of what's on offer, we need that lived experience, and it needs to be given a weight. People need to be involved in making decisions, not only in the personal treatment they receive, but also in services for people who are experiencing distress.
Thank you.
And you're not forgetting those measuring tools are not fixed. One day they're up, the next day they're down. Depends what's going on in that time in their lives that can make them feel suicidal every day, to then say, no, it's been every several days and that's okay. And you're right, we can't measure the in-between the lines, which is really hard. But we do conferences like this to talk about it, but again, we need those tools to get funding because it's a business, and that's what I've learned as a therapist, as someone who's providing that one-to-one support, that if I don't do those things, then I know my service is not going to get funded.
Yeah.
So you're stuck.
Any last words, because it's coming to lunch?
Yeah. So, I think what I find infuriating, though, is we do measure all these things and great things happen, and then we hear, as we did in our workshop here, and that's going to end in a year's time. Because we don't change what we provide. And I think at the heart of that is our attitude to risk. So whenever anything new comes along, we assess the risk of doing that. And we don't always think of the benefits. We tend to kind of focus on what might go wrong. And at the same time, we don't look at the risk of not changing what we do. You know, we know that services aren't working. We know that the world is changing in a way every day that we've never experienced before, and yet somehow we still seem to think that the status quo is better than change.
And I think there's a complexity with that. So for some people, status quo on how we measure and commission is probably safer because it's systems. But actually when it comes to continuation of care and services, people are always looking for the new and the innovative approach. So you lose that legacy of learning and experience developed by that service. Many things to ponder. These people are available over lunch. Have I? I was looking at that time. Oh, well, I was going to cut them short. Well, you look like you wanted to say something in response of that then.
I don't think I did,
Oh,
actually.
well, that's okay.
I think that was like pretty epic.
Okay. So just as we've got a few more minutes, I think there's a couple of C's I'd just like to retouch on, and that is the things we keep talking about, which is community, complexity, commissioning, but also collaboration. So there's a big issue. We've talked about looking at the issue of loneliness in silos. We've talked about commissioning in silos. We've talked about the community response being the be end and end all of everything. You know, so I'd just like, as we've got a few more minutes, your reflection on, actually, we've heard co-production, collaboration. What is the best way forward?
I think locally it's to do with pathways for people. So at a level that's senior enough that we can get people around the table, we need to look at the way that services, the way that people and services are currently working together, and whether or not there's things that we can do to support people in and out of and through pathways. And from my perspective, at least for older people, that conversation hasn't happened in 4 or 5 years around. There's no space for that currently. We know that when it comes down to it, really, when it comes down to working with people, your ability to get them from one service into another relies entirely on your personal relationships with a staff member in that service. Ultimately, that happens when you know someone in that service and you can pick up the phone. And so it all comes down to those relationships. But if that isn't being facilitated and driven at a strategic level, it stops happening at an operational level. And there aren't current pathways between existing services in Middlesbrough for mental health or other community services. And there aren't pathways for older people in and out of dementia and mental health services and how that gets bounced out. Or if there are, they aren't including everybody at the current time. And I think if that can be addressed, or there can be an ongoing conversation about that, that will filter down to the kind of personal relationships that Javairia needs with the staff in the local older people's mental health team and the people working in the housing department, so that there's a joint understanding of what everybody does, so that we can support people to move through those services more easily.
So I think communication is the key. I think, so I was fortunate enough to manage the Ageing Well Torbay programme for 3 years, and to know what sort of, very similar to Middlesbrough, the fantastic work that we were doing, and then to move to a local authority commissioning team and to be surprised that the local commissioners didn't know all that was happening in their communities. So we do have real assets and we have fantastic work, but sometimes the people developing strategies and commissioning services don't know all that we have in those communities. And if they don't know the great work that's going on, they don't know that they need to fund them as well. And they don't know where the gaps are, and they don't know where people are falling through. And they don't know that actually there could be much better pathways. We could be developing those pathways. And that's because we actually need to co-write strategies to commission, to understand what the needs are, what the gaps are, what we've got, and what we need to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And to add on to that, as an individual who's providing support for these individuals who are coming into our service, staff need support. There's only so much we can do, and there's so much limitations we have with time, funding, resources. So if there's more communication going on within services and across services, more meetings together or more opportunities to have a handover or a discussion, it could support me and my colleague much better. And it's not that complicated, because we're doing it within Ageing Better. We do it well within our outreach team of having that communication. So we're an example of it can be done and it's possible. And it is scary at times, but it's okay. We have to live by risk and take that as a challenge, but it can be done. And I would like that to continue how long we've got left, but to continue that it's possible, and use Ageing Better as an example of that it has been done. And we've made great connections with people and services as a result of how we work, with that openness and that readiness to have a conversation without any barriers, saying, oh, I can't do this because I have to see this and this. We tried to be adaptable and approachable, and I think it's possible if people give each other time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think with collaboration, I think in another programme we're involved with, which is Sport England local delivery pilots, there's a phrase in there which is progress moves at the speed of trust. And building those trusting relationships between partners at a local level is going to be key if we're going to actually be able to move forward at all. We need to get away from a competitive environment into one where we're collaborating together, and as partners we trust each other to deliver our parts of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that word of trust is a really good one to finish on, because we started the day with actually, in order to work with the most vulnerable and those that need our help, we need to develop a relationship of trust. And actually, in order to work effectively for those people, as partners, as professionals, we also need to be able to work in a climate of trust. So on that note, I think you can thank the panel, and then we'll have some lunch.